The house keys hit my cousin's plastic dinosaur plate with a sound that somehow commanded more respect than 31 years of my existence ever had. The keys to Mom and Dad's house, the house they were about to lose to foreclosure. The house I'd just purchased to save our family legacy, while sitting at the same kids' table they'd banished me to since I was 12. 10 adults at the grown-up table stopped mid-chew. My 8-year-old nephew Tommy looked up from his turkey nuggets like he understood something monumental had just happened. Uncle Frank's hand froze halfway to his mouth, gravy dripping off his fork onto great-grandma's antique tablecloth. Drop a house below if you've ever been the family member they underestimated while you were quietly saving everyone's ass. This one's for all the kids' table heroes who grew up to become the family's secret superhero. My name is Victoria Chin, I'm 31 years old, and I've spent 2 decades watching my family treat me like their perpetual disappointment while my older siblings collected praise like it was going out of style. But this Thanksgiving, I came prepared to flip the script in a way that would leave them speechless. The kids' table tradition started when I was 12. My brother Marcus was 14 and had just made varsity football. My sister Diana was 16 and had been accepted to Duke University early admission. Meanwhile, I'd failed my first algebra test and gotten suspended for 3 days after defending a kid who was being bullied. Victoria needs to learn some responsibility, Dad announced that Thanksgiving, pointing to the small card table set up in the corner with folding chairs and paper plates. She can sit with the children until she starts acting like an adult. 20 years later, I was still at that same kids' table. Not because I hadn't achieved anything, I'd built a software development company from my bedroom into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. But because once my family categorizes you as the problem child, that label sticks harder than superglue on concrete. Marcus had become a successful orthopedic surgeon with a practice in Manhattan, a penthouse apartment, and a wife who looked like she belonged in a magazine. Every Thanksgiving brought new stories about his surgical innovations, his country club memberships, and his children's private school achievements. Diana had followed her Duke education into corporate law, eventually becoming a partner at one of Chicago's most prestigious firms. She drove a Tesla, owned a lakefront condo, and spoke 3 languages fluently. Her annual vacation photos from European destinations made everyone else's trips look like weekend camping. Then there was me, sitting at the kids' table, listening to my family discuss my siblings' accomplishments while treating my own career like an extended phase I'd eventually outgrow. Victoria's still doing that computer thing, Mom would tell relatives who asked about my work. You know, websites and such. It's nice that she found something to keep her busy. Computer thing. Websites and such. As if Chen Digital Solutions hadn't revolutionized inventory management systems for 17 major retail chains, or developed the scheduling software that 3 hospital networks relied on for patient care coordination. But to my family, technology work was mysterious and therefore unimpressive. They couldn't brag about my achievements at cocktail parties because they didn't understand what I actually did for a living. Victoria fixes people's computers, Uncle Frank would explain to his golf buddies. She's always been good with gadgets. I didn't fix computers. I built enterprise software solutions that streamlined operations for Fortune 500 companies. My client list included household names that generated billions in annual revenue. But explaining software architecture to people who still printed emails was like describing color to someone who'd been blind since birth. The real problem wasn't their lack of understanding, it was their lack of interest. When Marcus described a complex surgical procedure, everyone listened with fascination and asked follow-up questions. When Diana explained a high-profile legal case, the entire table hung on every word. When I mentioned developing a supply chain optimization system that saved a major retailer $4.2 million annually, Dad changed the subject to the football game. And Mom asked if I'd seen Diana's latest Instagram post from her wine-tasting weekend in Napa. This pattern had persisted through every family gathering for 8 years. The kids' table had become my permanent address, surrounded by actual children who asked better questions about my work than my own parents ever had. What's software? My nephew Jake had asked during last year's Thanksgiving. It's like instructions that tell computers how to help people solve problems, I'd explained. I write the instructions that help hospitals keep track of patients, or help stores know what products they need to order. That sounds important, Jake had said, taking a bite of mashed potatoes. More important than my actual family had ever acknowledged. But this year was different. This year, I'd received information that would change our family's entire dynamic, whether they understood my career or not. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Mom had called me crying. Dad had been laid off from his job at the manufacturing plant after 26 years. Their savings were depleted from helping Marcus through medical school and Diana through law school. The mortgage payments were 3 months behind, and the bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings. We might lose the house, Victoria, Mom had sobbed into the phone. 40 years of memories, and we might lose everything. The house was more than just my childhood home, it was the family gathering place where 5 generations had celebrated holidays, birthdays, and major life events. Great-grandma's china cabinet still held the dishes she'd carried from Ireland. The living room walls displayed school photos, graduation pictures, and family portraits spanning decades. Losing the house would scatter our family traditions and destroy the physical foundation of our shared history. How much do you need to stop the foreclosure? I'd asked. $68,000 in back payments, plus another $40,000 for next year's payments to give your father time to find new work, Mom had explained. But we'll never be able to come up with that kind of money. $108,000. It was a significant sum, but not impossible for someone whose software company had generated $3.2 million in revenue over the past 18 months. But instead of just giving my parents the money, I'd made a different decision. I'd contacted the bank directly and arranged to purchase the house from them, paying off the full mortgage balance and transferring ownership into my name. Then I'd offered to let my parents continue living there rent-free while Dad searched for employment. It cost me $340,000 to buy the house outright, but it also meant my family's gathering place was secure forever. More importantly, it meant I owned the house where I'd been relegated to the kids' table for 2 decades. I hadn't told my parents about the purchase. I'd simply informed them that their foreclosure had been resolved and they could stop worrying about losing the house. They'd assumed Marcus or Diana had helped with the payments, and I hadn't corrected their assumption. But I'd kept the keys, planning to reveal the truth during Thanksgiving dinner when the entire extended family was present to witness the moment when the kids' table resident saved everyone's family legacy. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the usual dynamics. Marcus and Diana were seated at the main dining table with Mom, Dad, Uncle Frank, Aunt Martha, and 4 cousins who'd achieved various levels of conventional success. I was directed to my familiar spot at the kids' table with 3 actual children and my pregnant cousin Sarah, who was apparently being punished for having morning sickness during the appetizer course. The conversation at the main table focused on Marcus's latest surgical conference and Diana's recent promotion to senior partner. Uncle Frank was discussing his plans to expand his accounting practice, while Aunt Martha shared updates about her children's achievements in college and graduate school. Meanwhile, at the kids' table, 8-year-old Emma was explaining her science project about volcanoes, 10-year-old Tyler was describing his Little League batting average, and 6-year-old Sophia was building an architectural masterpiece out of mashed potatoes and green beans. Aunt Victoria, do you still fix computers? Tyler asked while cutting his turkey into precise squares. I build software that helps big companies work better, I explained, the same explanation I'd been giving for years. That's cool, Tyler said. Can you make a game? I could, but I usually make programs that help doctors and stores and banks do their jobs more efficiently. Emma, Tyler, stop bothering your aunt with work questions, Aunt Martha called from the main table. Victoria doesn't need to talk about computers during Thanksgiving dinner. Victoria doesn't need to talk about computers. As if my career was an inappropriate topic for family discussion, unlike Marcus's detailed descriptions of knee replacement procedures or Diana's analysis of corporate merger strategies. The dismissal was automatic and unconscious. My work was categorized as less worthy of dinner conversation than my cousin's elementary school achievements or Uncle Frank's tax preparation business updates. But 30 minutes into dinner, Dad stood up to make his annual Thanksgiving toast, the moment I'd been waiting for. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," Dad began, raising his wine glass. "This year has been challenging for our family, but we're grateful to still have this house and each other." Still have this house. Dad thought they'd kept the house through some kind of payment plan or temporary bank forgiveness. He had no idea that his disappointing daughter had purchased it outright to preserve the family legacy. "We're especially grateful for Marcus and Diana, who've always been there to support us through difficult times," Dad continued. "Their success makes us proud every day." Their success. The success that hadn't actually contributed to saving the family house, but was being credited anyway because success equals good intentions in my family's logic. "And of course, we love Victoria too," Dad added as an obvious afterthought. "Even though she marches to the beat of her own drum." Marches to the beat of her own drum. The polite way of saying I was the family disappointment who couldn't achieve conventional success but was tolerated because blood is thicker than water. That's when I reached into my purse and pulled out the house keys. The keys were attached to a keychain with the address engraved in elegant script, 1247 Maple Street. Our family home's address, but with a small addition that would become significant in about 30 seconds. I placed the keys gently on Tommy's plastic dinosaur plate, where they landed with a soft clink that somehow commanded more attention than Dad's entire toast. "What are those keys, Aunt Victoria?" Tommy asked, picking them up to examine the keychain. "Those are the keys to this house," I said calmly, continuing to eat my turkey as if I hadn't just dropped a bombshell at the kids' table. The main table's conversation stopped abruptly. Mom looked over with confusion, probably wondering why I was showing off house keys during dinner. "Victoria, why do you have keys to our house?" Mom asked. "Because I own it now," I replied simply, taking a sip of cranberry juice. The silence was immediate and complete. Even the kids stopped eating to stare at the keys, sensing that something important was happening. "What do you mean, you own it?" Dad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I mean I purchased the house from the bank 3 weeks ago to prevent the foreclosure," I explained. "The deed is in my name now." Uncle Frank's fork clattered against his plate. Diana's wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Marcus looked like someone had just told him surgery wasn't real. "Victoria, that's impossible," Diana said. "Buying a house outright costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. $340,000, to be exact," I confirmed. "I paid cash to avoid any financing complications." The mathematical reality was sinking in around the table. Everyone knew that houses in our neighborhood cost significant money, and I'd just claimed to have purchased one with cash. "Where did you get $340,000? Marcus asked, his surgeon's confidence replaced by genuine confusion. "From my business," I said. Chen Digital Solutions generated $3.2 million in revenue over the past 18 months. The house purchase was a significant expense, but well within my financial capabilities, $3.2 million in revenue. The number hung in the air like a truth bomb that was reshaping everyone's understanding of the family dynamics. "Your computer thing made $3.2 million? Uncle Frank asked, unable to hide his amazement. "My software development company," I corrected. "We create enterprise solutions for major corporations. It's been quite successful." The kids' table had suddenly become the most important location in the dining room. Every adult was staring at me, trying to reconcile the family disappointment narrative with the reality that I'd just saved their entire legacy with pocket change. "Victoria, why didn't you tell us about your business success?" Mom asked. "I tried to," I replied. "Every time I mentioned client achievements or revenue growth, someone changed the subject to Marcus's surgery schedule or Diana's legal cases. It became easier to let people assume what they wanted about my career. The truth was uncomfortable but undeniable. They'd been so focused on conventional success markers that they'd completely missed my entrepreneurial achievements. "But you sit at the kids' table," Aunt Martha said, as if physical seating arrangements determined financial capability. "I sit at the kids' table because that's where you put me," I pointed out. "My seating assignment doesn't reflect my bank account balance." Tommy picked up the keys again, examining the keychain more carefully. "Aunt Victoria, does this mean you're like our landlord now?" "Something like that," I said, smiling at his innocent question. "But don't worry, the rent is free for Grandma and Grandpa." The conversation continued for another hour, with family members asking detailed questions about my business, my clients, and my financial planning. But the dynamic had shifted completely. Instead of tolerating the family disappointment, they were trying to understand how they'd so thoroughly misjudged my capabilities. "Victoria, I owe you an apology," Dad said during dessert. "We've been treating you like a child while you were building something remarkable. That was wrong of us." "I don't need apologies," I replied. "But I do need respect. My work is just as valuable as Marcus's surgery or Diana's legal practice, even if you don't understand the technical details." "From now on, you're sitting at the main table," Mom announced. The kids' table was clearly a mistake. "Actually," I said, looking around at Tommy, Tyler, Emma, and Sophia, "I like the kids' table. These guys ask better questions about my work than most adults do. But I'd appreciate being included in family conversations about important matters." The evening continued with a completely different energy. Instead of being dismissed as the family oddball, I was consulted about financial decisions, business strategies, and investment opportunities. My siblings asked for advice about their own career development and retirement planning. But the most satisfying moment came when Tommy raised his juice cup for a toast. "I want to thank Aunt Victoria for saving our house," he announced with 8-year-old sincerity. "And for explaining what software does. I think I want to learn about computers now." The applause that followed was the first family recognition I'd received for my professional achievements. It came from a child at the kids' table, but it felt more genuine than any praise I'd ever imagined receiving from the adults. 6 months later, Chen Digital Solutions was featured in a technology magazine as one of the region's fastest-growing software companies. The article included a photo of me in my office, surrounded by awards and industry recognition that my family finally understood represented significant achievement. Marcus and Diana both asked for copies of the article to share with their colleagues. Mom framed it and put it on the mantel next to their medical and law school graduation photos. Dad started introducing me as his daughter, the successful software entrepreneur, instead of his daughter who works with computers. The house became a symbol of how wrong they'd been about my capabilities. Every family gathering was a reminder that the person they'd relegated to the kids' table had been the one with the financial resources to preserve their family legacy. But more importantly, our relationships improved because they finally understood that success comes in many forms, and conventional achievement isn't the only measure of a person's worth or capability. Tommy did end up learning about computers. He started visiting my office after school, asking questions about programming and software development. By age 10, he was building simple websites and talking about studying computer science in college. "Aunt Victoria," he said during one visit, "I'm glad you sat at the kids' table. Otherwise, I wouldn't have learned about your awesome job." The kids' table had been intended as punishment for not meeting family expectations. Instead, it became the place where I inspired the next generation to pursue technology careers and think creatively about problem-solving. 2 years after that Thanksgiving revelation, I was invited to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs. During my presentation about overcoming family skepticism and building business success, I told the story of the keys on the dinosaur plate. "Sometimes the people who underestimate you most are the ones who should be celebrating you," I concluded. But their recognition isn't necessary for your success, it's just nice when it finally comes. The audience applauded, and afterward, several women approached me with their own stories about being underestimated by family members who couldn't see past conventional success definitions. The lesson I learned from those 20 years at the kids' table wasn't about proving my worth through dramatic revelations or expensive gestures. It was about understanding that respect has to be earned through consistent achievement, regardless of whether people understand or appreciate what you're building. My software company had always been valuable and meaningful work, but it took buying the family house to make them recognize its worth. Sometimes the most effective response to being underestimated isn't explaining or defending, it's simply succeeding at such a level that recognition becomes inevitable. What's your kids' table story? Share below if you've ever been the family member who surprised everyone by quietly becoming the hero they never saw coming.